All right, I'm streaming now.
All right, so we're live now. Let's just double check and make sure that it is coming in clear. Hopefully so.
Let's see.
Thank you, everybody else, for joining us. Anybody that was having problems and didn't hear us earlier, we were having some technical difficulties, but I think we have that figured out now. Do we not?
Yeah, we do.
All right, everybody, this is the Doug and Fur Show. I'm Doug Petrozelli. This is my partner in truth.
Fernando.
All right, and today we're going to be talking about foundational or fundamental ideologies. And I think that's really important because everything that typically we believe or anybody believes comes from a foundational or fundamental ideology. We don't just believe something for no reason. For instance, most people in the West, most people in the United States, Western European countries have Christian Judeo fundamental ideologies, even if they identify as atheism, even if they identify as agnostic, whatever you have, if they disagree with Christianity 100%. A simple thing is believing that not racism, but that slavery is wrong and is bad. That is a Christian Judeo ideology. And whether or not somebody subscribes to Judeo-Christian as a religious system, if you believe that slavery is wrong, then you are subscribing to an ideology, whether you know it or not, and have been influenced it by more than likely the culture that's around you.
Let me say something there.
Yeah.
I think that through history, slavery was always practiced in all the cultures.
Yeah, it's a universal evil.
Yeah, and I think obviously including in people of the Christian faith.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Slavery was practiced. Although it's important to clarify that slavery wasn't okay according to Jesus.
Absolutely.
And when Jesus says slaves obey your masters, he's not condoning slavery, but instead he's talking about slavery in the sense of the old sense, indentured servitude, where slaves had equal rights to citizens, but they were just working to pay off a debt or something like that. And I say that over time as the United States and abolished slavery, the rest of the world began to abolish slavery as well,
Yes.
including other cultures such as Buddhism and Eastern Orthodox and things like that.
Right.
So was Christianity the first to abolish slavery?
Yeah, well, it's the Western world. I believe England was the first to abolish slavery, and when we look at the abolitionists, all abolitionists were strongly influenced by Judeo-Christian values, specifically the Bible, the New Testament, and I just also, just to, that's been the influence and the driving force of this world to abolish slavery. The only reason we even know it's wrong is because we see the Judeo-Christian value says that all human beings are intrinsically valued and not one should be owner over another. We look at that even at the, I don't know quite the beginning of the Bible, but Exodus is pretty close to the beginning, and you see very clearly that God is against slavery. He is against the oppressor. He is for the oppressed. So I think it's very important to talk about that, and I actually think it'd really be a good idea to talk maybe one day really about that scripture in the Bible one time. But I think that's great to preference that there for that moment. But I think it'd be a really good show one time to actually talk about that scripture and how
slavery.
that is, how we are socially, politically supposed to live that out, how we are influenced by that.
Okay, so we want to talk about what critical theory?
Yeah, so real quick, anybody who wants to call, we have the number on the screen. We'd love to talk to you, and whether you agree, disagree, whatever you have, we want to hear from you. Anything else that you may have to say that you don't want to be live on the air, but you want to talk to us, you can send instant messages to either me or Fur. We'd love to talk to you. Also, new topics for the show, something that you want to hear, tell us. We want to talk about it. So that being said, we're going to talk about postmodernism first. And postmodernism is, in essence, what a lot of people believe we live in now. The original idea of a modern world was that there's no God, but all the answers, and there's no answers found in God, but the modern world says that there is science. So that we believe in science, and science is where we're going to find all the answers. That being said, as the modern theory started to grow, it actually started to prove more and more that there was a God that did exist. Science doesn't disprove God. If anything, the more and more we get deep into science and understanding, the more and more we prove that there is a creative designer and that there is a God. So postmodernism says
I
that.
think
Go ahead.
yeah, I think with what you're saying, I think that the more we get into science, the more evidence we see for intelligent design. That's what I would say.
Yes.
So I don't. While I personally believe in the God of the Jews and the Christian God,
Yeah.
I think that even if you don't believe in that God, science points to intelligent design. Whether you believe it's a distant God who just created the universe and is out of it, or the Christian God, or but I think science ultimately does point to intelligent design.
Sure.
Although the other theories include just multi dimensions, and
Right.
we
Right.
just so
Right.
happen to be the one. So I
Right.
think I think both theories are valid. But then again, we can talk about a million other theories like
Right.
living in a simulation and stuff like that.
Right.
I think the easiest one to that just points to is intelligent design, and I forgot who it was that said that usually the the most rational explanation is the correct one. It's
Absolutely.
not always the case, but I think that that's something worth considering here.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's a little off
Yeah,
topic.
so what postmodern theory says is that there is no truth, and there is no right and wrong. There's no one to tell you.
No objective right
Absolutely,
or wrong,
there's
right?
no objective right or wrong. What's wrong to you is wrong to you. What's true to you is true to you. Your truth, my truth, those are things that I just want to say I clearly disagree with and reject, but for purposes of explaining postmodern theory, I do want to come across it as objective as I can, even though this theory rejects
Yeah. So
objection.
basically, relativism, aside from scientific relativism, like general relativity and how Einstein describes and stuff like that, we take that concept of everything is relative, and
Right,
also apply it to morals. Right.
absolutely.
So your truth is not my truth. So in our culture, murder may be wrong, but in another culture, murder is justified. Because that's the problem with that theory.
Right.
Eventually, you could go so far as to something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And critical theory needs postmodernism because critical theory, one of the fundamental principles of critical theory, and I'd also, if there's somebody that has more educated on this and wants to challenge on this, we definitely want to. But this is something I've read books on, I listen to podcasts on. But my deepest understanding, one of the fundamental principles, is that critical theory rejects objective truth. And they say that it is a cultural construct that is made and set up to literally lift certain people up and keep other individuals down. And critical theory is something that, like I said, I also definitely reject. I don't believe that it is something that is good for society because it divides us into multiple different segments and I guess in our social lives. It's a little bit instead of just economic division, it's more and class division. It's more separating us between race, gender, sexual preferences. I mean, I've even seen it go all the way down to separating us between good-looking and what we would define as bad-looking, as skinny and fat. Which these are all theories. There's fat theory. There's critical race theory. There is, you know,
Well,
gender theory, and all those things.
so correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea, the school of thought of critical theory
Yeah,
and postmodernism, if I remember correctly, it branched out from Marxism, right?
it did.
So Marxists, they were unhappy with the current state of Marxist thought, and they began to modify it into critical theory. So maybe we can talk about Marxism a little bit,
Yeah.
because we always hear Marxist and we relate it to this negative thing, like, oh, you're such a Marxist, oh, you Marxist this, Marxist that. So why don't we? A lot of people don't even know what it means. So why don't we talk about what it means so that
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can
we
see
definitely.
why it's not a working theory. So.
Right. So Marxism is developed by Karl Marx and Engels, which was one of Karl Marx's, I don't know, I guess
Look
would
it
you
up.
want to call partner in crime, if you want to say that. But Karl Marx developed this theory. He wrote the Communist Manifesto. I would encourage anybody to read it. I think it's very interesting, and I want you to know I disagree. bourgeoisie class, this upper class, and to redistribute the wealth evenly.
Yeah, this essentially has been an issue for all of history, right? It's
Yes.
always the rich ruling over the poor, the lords and the peasants,
Right.
and you know, in times of struggle, all the peasants are starving and they're banging at the lord's door to feed them,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
that
All the
always
way back
happened,
to
you know?
Exodus.
Exactly, and there's always this revolution of the poor wanting to overthrow the rich, and it's like, you don't deserve that, you don't deserve all that money, you need to redistribute, you need to give some to us because we're poor, and it's not fair that we're working and you're benefiting.
Right.
That's the general idea, and it makes sense at face value, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
like
It does.
anybody who's in that working class is like, it's not fair, we're the ones doing the work and you're the one getting the money,
Right.
right? So it makes sense at face value, but why doesn't it work?
Well, one of the things that doesn't work is because that person who started that business is the wealth creator. They're the ones who are taking the risk. It's a lot easier to go get a job from somebody than to create a job for somebody.
Yes.
And if you just go and take all the wealth from somebody and give it to people who are just workers and not job creators, they don't know how to create jobs. It takes a special individual and a skill set and a drive and a risk assessment. Somebody who's not just going to, punch a clock from 9 to 5, which is fine if we want to do that, but there's a different level of commitment, so there's a different level of benefit.
No, not only that, but if you're taking the money that the rich are making and giving it to the poor, now the poor are discouraged from working. So
Absolutely.
now nobody makes money. And that's just, it makes sense when you
Right.
start looking at that. But then it's like, well, you know what? Why don't we try it? How much of the world has tried Marxism and has failed?
Yeah, multiple. And that to me is where I say to myself, Karl Marx never saw this come to fruition. Karl Marx, maybe he didn't realize what was going to happen. Another thing that happens is job creators, no one's incentivized to start a business and create jobs if they know that their workers can just take it away from them.
Exactly. It's like, why would you want to start a business if they're just going to take it from you? The risk is not going to pay off. You're taking all this risk, you're investing all this money into starting a business only to have it stripped from you. So you're not incentivized to
Right.
create a business.
And that's easy for us to say because we can look at history and see this is what happened. When
Exactly.
we study human nature and we see what makes a human being drive to go one way or another, it's easy for us. So I'll just give Karl Marx the benefit of the doubt, and we can get into all type of other things about him later. But for me to be objective right now, I'm trying to be as objective as possible. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He didn't see what I'm seeing. He had an idea how things were going to turn out. Maybe he had the best intentions
maybe he had
involved.
good intentions.
But we always have to remember the road to hell is paved with the greatest intentions. And that is exactly what the road of communism is a road straight to hell. It's only produced poverty. It's only produced equality in the fact that everybody has nothing.
Yeah. So I think like Marxism was essentially inadvertently creating this segregation of class, right? So now it's making the poor hate the rich.
Right.
The working class hate the rich.
Right.
But the working class also hate the poor. Karl Marx didn't care for the poor.
Right.
So now there's even greater division between these classes than there ever was before.
Right.
Right.
So one of the things that happened with critical theory, there's the Frankfurt School of Thought, which were a bunch of Marxists who the idea was that this was going to happen naturally. They weren't so much pushing this revolutionary revolution to happen. They weren't these leaders at the front of the line saying, "Yes, let's go over here. Let's run into these corporations and kill the workers and confiscate and steal all their wealth and give it to amongst each other." But it was the idea that this was just eventually going to naturally happen, that these workers were not going to tolerate this, and that naturally workers were going to overthrow. And that was Karl Marx's theory, and it's continued to live on through him to the point where we got to the Frankfurt School, and a lot of these people were Marxists, and they were like, well, why hasn't this naturally happened? Why hasn't this just happened already? Because it didn't take off in America. America didn't necessarily hate their boss. They wanted to be their boss. They didn't necessarily hate the corporations. They wanted to work for good corporations, So because they saw that wealth was growing. Yes, wealth always grows faster at the top, but the point is that if it's growing faster at the top, it's going to grow slower at the bottom. The point is it's growing.
Yeah, it's growing.
And I just want to say this, but not to be so harsh, we shouldn't care about wealth inequality. We should care that people are not poor. I don't want to take money from the rich person and make and give it to the poor person. I want to find a way that I don't have to worry about the rich person, but we can make that rich person, that poor person, rich.
Yeah,
That's the hope, and there is a way without confiscating it.
yeah, and I think this is the economic perspective.
Right.
And I think one day we should get deeper
Yeah, yeah,
into economics, like capitalism, socialism type of deal. But how did this transfer over ultimately to, instead of it being by class, now it became a race,
gender
a
issue.
gender, a sexual preference issue?
Right, right.
How did it eventually turn from one to the other?
Right. So one of the things that they were saying was that that the working class they weren't overthrowing and they were happy in this lifestyle of capitalism because they shared the bourgeois values. They liked to go to church. They liked a lot of the same things. They believed in the family. All these things that universally through class, at least in the United States, we've always seen that people want to have a family, whether you're rich or poor. People are driven to go to these social institutions, whether it's your mosque, your synagogue, or your church.
Mm-hmm.
People are driven toward these things, and even outside of that, the Rotary clubs, all these the bowling leagues and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Americans have always been very, very into community. So how do you divide that? And when you look at this research, and I encourage anybody to look this up on your own, because this is not conspiracy theory. This is actual ideologies written down, meant to infiltrate capitalist cultures and lead them toward Marxism, and is going into cultures, disrupting these things, such as the civil institutions, such as the churches, such as the family, such as these down to the Rotary Club, and believing the only way to really separate people in that, because this economic system's not working, is to separate them through race, to separate them through gender, to separate them through sexual preference, and to say that they're individuals that just hate you because you have different lifestyles, because you're a woman, because you're a different shade of color of skin. These are all ideas that were put in and have divided people, because the only way for communism to really come forward, full circle, is division. It's divide and conquer.
So, so what you're saying is that these things are written down. They're ideologies that
Yes.
are written down and that exist.
Yes.
Where do they exist? Let's look them up.
Yeah.
You know, that these are things that are written down, um, and I think these things that we're talking about, we notice a lot of it happening in the United States, right?
Right.
So I think the general idea now that we see happening a lot,
Right.
um, is this hatred towards the white man,
Right.
the straight white Christian male,
Right.
because essentially the straight white Christian male, when you look at the metaphor between what's happening now and Marxism, the straight white Christian male is the bourgeois,
Right.
and the working class is everyone who's a minority, uh, blacks, women, transgender, gay, and everything else that is not a straight white male. And
Right. Straight white Christian male.
straight white Christian male, sure.
Right.
And they see this by looking at statistics and saying, oh, the straight white Christian male is the one that benefits the most. They hold
Right,
political
right.
office, they make the most money, they're the business owners,
Right.
and they've historically held the power.
Right.
So they're essentially, in the metaphor, the bourgeois. Now, whether the two are related, whether Marxism and critical race theory and those schools of thoughts are related to what's actually happening. So
I mean,
It's
they
one.
are related.
Yeah,
Okay. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and anybody can research that.
we can see that one matches the definition. So, but in order, sorry, the fact that some ideology is written down and it exists on paper,
Right.
and the fact that it's actually happening doesn't mean that the two are always like one was caused by the other.
Right.
So, for example, if we sit here and we write out a play,
Right.
and simultaneously someone is performing a very similar play somewhere else, it doesn't mean that they read our play and decided to do it the same way. It happened by coincidence. Now, in that case, writing a play is very specific, so
Right.
that seems sketch. But I think for something like division by race and sexual orientation, something like that, I think that's been a problem throughout much of humanity. Cultures tend to stick together and be warm towards each other,
Right.
and they tend to be careful and prejudiced towards other culture. My culture is the best. My country is the best.
Right.
It's always been that spirit, and
Well, it's very easy to divide people that way.
so yeah. So is this whole idea, these ideologies that are written down, did they cause this division directly, or did it just happen and that's a way of explaining it?
I mean, we could definitely look into it, but there are actual individuals who have talked about, you have to infiltrate the culture. They realize that it can't be an economic system of just saying you need to hate the rich because you're poor, because capitalism has won and shown that people don't really care so much if you're living a decent lifestyle, so much that Bill Gates is a multi-billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
And the more and more people, the more and more capitalism wins, the more and more people find themselves in that place where they have two cars in the driveway. They they have healthcare. They have. I'm not saying everybody, but the more and more capitalism goes on, the more and more people find themselves into decent lifestyles. And when you get to that point, you don't so much have this deep level of resentment towards somebody who has so much more than you because you're doing okay. And the goal really needs to be, how do we get people to be okay? So if you have a bunch of people who are doing okay, how do you divide us?
Yeah.
You have to divide us through our human nature.
But who are these individuals that are like trying to do this? So like, is there like an elite secret group of people that are trying to infiltrate the culture?
Right. Well, I wouldn't say there's an elite secret group of people. I don't want to go down conspiracy theory lane here, but the Frankfurt School, I would honestly encourage people to look into the Frankfurt School. It's very open. There's plenty of videos online that I don't think are very conspiratorial. I think they're very direct. They've been a very open group of people trying to figure out why Marxism hasn't taken off, and they were very clear that we need to divide people through different means, more than just economics.
Okay.
So it's very clear, and they brought those ideas to the United States, and it's very clear. You can look all those things up. That's on Wikipedia, which is a left-leaning, site.
And how do these people do this? How do they infiltrate the culture? How do they bring these ideas into mainstream culture? Do they use media? Do they use the internet? Do they run for political office and then implement laws?
Yeah,
how do they do it?
Their biggest way to infiltrate the culture was through the universities. They became professors, and that was the biggest point because they know that the younger we are, the more malleable we are. They understand that we're brought up in a culture that we're taught to respect teachers, that teachers and professors are people of wealth and wisdom, and that they are we're to learn from them. So much so that an 18-year-old kid going to a major university, especially at a Harvard or a Yale or whatever, is taking a professor's word as complete gospel. And that was their number one way of infiltrating the culture. Then once you go there, these elite schools, from there you have politics, you have entertainment, you have everything. You have these people going from there now out into the culture, becoming, people from Harvard are the ones becoming doctors, they're becoming lawyers, they're becoming politicians, they're becoming, big leaders in entertainment and investment. Yeah. And that was the number one way.
Which it's interesting.
And it's very clear. I don't want to sound like a conspiratorial. You can look these things up. I would encourage you to look these up, and that was their train of thought. And we look at where Marxism is most prevalent here. It's at our major universities.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the universities because we see and we hear a lot about universities.
Right.
University professors talking about things like the white man
Right, right,
and them being the cause of everything bad,
right,
and them historically being the colonizers and the powerful and oppressing everyone else, oppressing minorities.
right.
Now, whether or not you believe that that's true, that the white man is oppressing people, we definitely do see that train of thought happening in universities. Now, I think whether or not um, there are people becoming professors at universities and infiltrating the culture, whether that is true or not, maybe it's happening organically or maybe it's happening through people. Whether you believe that or not, that's not important. The point is that it's happening, right?
That their ideas that are floating around.
That those ideas are currently happening in our culture. We see it all the time.
Right, right,
We
right.
see it on media.
Yeah,
We
there's
see
no
it
doubt that those cultures exist.
it's happening.
And
It's
I'm
happening.
just we're trying to talk about they're coming from a root.
And
but,
that's where cancel culture comes from.
Right.
Right? Like all these people are getting canceled because usually it has something to do with a minority. Like Jake from State Farm got canceled. You know?
Right.
So we see things like that. It's always remove the white man and put in a minority.
Right.
Remove the straight person and put in a transgender. Remove.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't represent these people, these minorities, but I'm just saying that it's happening. The ideas that are written down that you mentioned about critical race theory and postmodernism and things like that, those ideas are happening, and that's what we're trying to address right now. I think this is a shorter podcast because we're just laying out these ideas just to introduce the way into the next couple topics, which we're going to talk about feminism, we're going to talk about racism, we're going to talk about all the other forms of segregation. And,
and I think we just want to be clear.
And
I don't think you or I give a damn about anybody's sexual preference, their race. Like, I actually don't. You know, diversity is not a bad thing. It's not the ultimate thing. When it comes to a job, I want to hire the person who can do a job. If a transgender can do a good job, and I'm there, and I'm the own business owner, I'm going to pick the best candidate. I really don't care what you do behind closed door. I don't care what your race is. I don't care what your background. I want to hire you to do a job. And that's the diversity I want, the people who are doing excellence. And I've seen that across the board, that the human being is capable of excellence, and it really has nothing to do with their preferences or the color of their skin.
I agree.
And that's a capitalist mentality. For anybody who doesn't understand, that's capitalism. To have diversity simply to
just have the best person for the job, you know.
Right. To fill to have a diversity quota for the simple means of having diversity. I find that to be damaging to our society.
Yeah, because there could be someone who can do a better job, and now that person's out looking for a job when they could potentially be enhancing whatever company they were supposed to work for, but now it's like we're forcing this diversity, and that's kind of what I forgot the term for it.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action is
right. Yeah, and I disagree with that fully, and we can always have a conversation because I'm sure many people do agree with it that could be watching. But when we get to the fundamental lines of this, it says essentially all critical theory says all inequality is a direct result of inequity. So if there's an inequality of outcome, it's a direct result of somebody being oppressive. That being said, that the idea that capitalism is where it's being said that the white man is thriving under capitalism, or the bourgeois class, whatever you want to call it, is
because
thriving.
They're oppressing someone.
Well, it's saying that this is a system, capitalism, that is set up this way to make these people thrive.
And by that definition, what you mentioned earlier, they must be oppressing someone by that school of thought, right?
Right.
Well, we can easily debunk that right now, right? Let's say you have two people, one works hard and one is lazy and doesn't work at all.
Right.
The person that worked hard didn't oppress the one that didn't work or was lazy.
Absolutely.
They just, one worked and one did it.
Right.
So I'm not saying that that's the case always, but we just saw an example. That is an example right there of a way in which the person who succeeded was not oppressing the person who didn't succeed. So we just debunked that right there.
Right.
You know, I'm sure in some cases it is true that the successful person is oppressing the other person, but I would say that it's not always the case. So we have to be careful with that school of thought. The idea that one class is oppressing another,
Right.
we can't just automatically apply that
Right.
because in some cases it may not be true, and we have to look at a case by case basis.
Right. And I will say that capitalism is segregatory, but it has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with your skin color. It has nothing to do with your sexual preference or your sexual identity. It has everything to do with segregating you according to your values. Good values in capitalism move you up. Bad values in capitalism, you will fall behind.
Yeah,
That's a reality.
and
Um,
I think there are exceptions,
right, no, no.
based
And
by
I think that's the rule, and I do believe there are exceptions.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. No, and I think that the exceptions sometimes happen by opportunity. Someone just has more opportunity than
Oh,
someone
sure,
else.
sure.
Someone grew up poor and they weren't able to receive a good education,
Right,
so they are more unlikely to be a business owner, for
sure.
instance, right? I mean, I'm sure they can if they work hard,
Right.
but they're gonna have to work harder than the person who had it handed to them.
Oh,
That does
absolutely.
exist, and that's unfortunate, but that's life. Some people are born without arms. Some people are born with disabilities,
Right,
and I mean, we try our best to even the playing field,
right.
but I don't think it's fair to overthrow the person who had the opportunity just because someone was born without it. It's good to help the person that didn't have the opportunity, but I would say that it's detrimental to overthrow the person
Well,
who did have the
I do
opportunity.
want to say I don't know if we talked about this on the last show, but the Brookings Institution, and they had a study, and I'm citing this, and it's a left leaning institution. The Brookings Institution says that in the United States, which is one of the most capitalist systems there is, in the United States, if you do three things, you will not be poor. You will actually end up in the middle class. So this is not just working class. You'll end up in the middle class if you
Yeah, I
do
love this.
three things, and that is don't have a baby until you're married, graduate high school, work a full time job. I think it's 77% of people who do those three things end up in the middle class.
Oh, it's
It's
crazy.
2% of people who do those things stay in poverty. This is what
So
capitalism
what
does.
about everybody else? 77, 2%. What
Yeah,
about
I
the
think the
other
rest you end up in the working class.
one? Oh, okay.
The rest is the working class. So your overwhelming chances of doing those three things in the United States in a capitalistic system, your overwhelming chances of being in the middle class ending up. This is not just not being poor. This is being decently well off.
And it has nothing to do with race or
It has
anything.
nothing to do with race. This is simply being born into poverty. You do those three things. That is this is the
Wow.
driving force. I mean, single motherhood is the greatest generator of poverty, and that's one of the biggest things. And those usually that's what usually leads to dropping out of high school and not working or being able to work a full time job.
Yeah.
And those things, and that's one of the biggest
Yeah, we
things.
can
And that's across the board. That's not a black thing. That's not a white thing. That's not a Hispanic thing. It's people who do that, who have babies before they're married. Typically, that is a road that leads to poverty.
Of
And
course.
there's people that make it out of that. Thank God this country can do it. But the point is that good decisions equal good outcomes in a capitalist society, and we wanted
Mhm.
to encourage that. And that's one of the biggest things. And one of the biggest things that I've seen when we talk about wealth disparity by race is that Asian Americans are actually outpacing whites on annual income. And you can actually look that up on Wikipedia, which is another left leaning resource. Which
When you say left leaning, I just want to interject and see if you mean what I think you mean.
Sure.
When you say left leaning, you mean a you mean tending to align more with policies that are liberal or democratic.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And I
Because I don't want our audience to think that we're grouping people and saying you're left, you're right, and we hate each other.
Right.
Right. We're just saying when we say left leaning, we mean your viewpoints align with these
Right.
values,
Right.
and these values are on the left, and these values are on the right.
Right. And the reason I would say left leaning is simply because I want it to not be biased. Left leaning would be not exactly where I fall on a scale of where I fall politically. I would actually fall more to the libertarian right, not more toward. I guess those would be more on
Yeah,
the one of the examples, though, that we can clearly see that this system, I don't believe, is racist in any way. Capitalist system is not racist. Uh, because Asian Americans are outpacing white Americans in annual income.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you can look up on Wikipedia. Like we said, it's more left leaning, not I basically aligning with things that maybe I don't necessarily agree with all the time, but I think it's a great resource. And the thing is that a lot of the Asian Americans that come here have the values of hard work, dedication. The family life is very important, and those values thrive under a capitalist society.
Okay.
And that's something that we have to, and I think that from, I don't want this to be from government, but as people that are part of social society, we encourage those values. As a Christian and a believer, I should encourage that no matter what your belief is, to work hard, to be dedicated to one woman, to be in that same household as your child, and to do those things. And I understand that there's people that are already unfortunately in those situations, and we can do our best to work around it.
Yeah, and they can.
Right.
They might just have to work a little bit harder. If you have a child and you're 19 and you're unmarried,
right,
you might have to work harder, right? You have to work more jobs to provide for your child, and, and it puts you at a disadvantage, but you can do it.
Right.
So.
And that's, just to kind of wrap it up. So we talked about those values. So I do want to wrap this up in just talking about the extremes on the critical theories. Is that these good values, when I say that capitalism is segregatorial, but has nothing to do with race, has nothing to do with your gender identity, your sexual preference, or your gender at large, but it's a segregation upon values. So when we go to the extreme, and this is not conspiratorial at all, you'd have to dig a little deeper to find this, but this is an actual thing. This was actually put out, I forget, was the African American part of the Smithsonian Museum. I can't remember exactly where that was, but I have it right here. But it was basically saying that these values that I'm saying are values that are not. It's called white culture in the United States, and these are things such as being on time, being religious. A father that's in the home. These are all white values. Things that are of responsibility. These are white values. Now, I disagree with that. I think that these are just values that are good for anybody.
Yeah, that sounds super wrong, right?
Yes, exactly. I think that's super racist to think that somebody else, because of a different skin tone, couldn't possibly be a responsible, decent person, because a lot of these things, and that's the extreme. That's the real underlying when we come to these critical theories.
What you just mentioned, white culture, is the extreme. That thought that if you're white, you have these values.
Right, and that's why you're thriving under a capitalist system, because you have these white values, and they say that that's why Asians are thriving, is because they've internalized whiteness, and they have these values of, such as being on time to work, being dedicated.
Yeah, that sounds really racist.
A lot of these things. And this is not anything, I think it's the most racist thing. I mean, I was reading this, and I was like, is this something the Ku Klux Klan wrote? Because I just think that this is just things that anybody can do, and everybody should do. And as I read the Bible, these seem like biblical values that God has said all men to do.
Yeah, values have nothing to do with your race or gender or anything like that. Values are internal, right?
And I say that just to kind of shine a light on what that is, what ultimately critical theory is built on. Everything's built on a foundation, and the foundation is when you keep pressing, when you get down to these tough questions, these are the answers that you're going to be met with. So I disagree with them, but we want to present it to you, and you tell us what you think.
Okay. Yeah, so as we wrap this up, I guess the next couple topics we're going to be talking about are the actual individual segregations, like feminism. I think I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, and we're going to have a guest on.
Yeah, and it's important to know that our approach to this is not to say that the people who believe these things, like the people who believe of the segregation, and the people who believe in this white culture, and the people who believe these things, I don't want to say that like they're evil and they're doing this on purpose. I think that ultimately everyone in their heart thinks they're doing right, and everyone in their heart wants the best.
Yeah.
Aside from, like, when they're angry, and with the exception of some people who really want evil.
Yeah.
But
There are sociopaths.
but yeah, but I think that I don't want to do that attack where, like, oh, if you believe this, you're evil and you're out to hurt people and you're out to get us. No, I believe that your thoughts are valid, and I believe that your intentions are right. But objectively speaking, some things are better than others. Right. Some
Right. Well,
ideas
there are
better than
superior
others.
values, and there are
Yes.
superior cultures, and
Yes.
that's a reality. I know that that sounds harsh, but I would say, cultures where pedophilia is accepted, we live in a superior culture than that.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So
I'm saying that is accepted in some cultures. So if that is the extreme, then
So when
there's
you-
going to be other things as well. That
when you
are,
say that there are superior cultures, I don't want that to be taken out of context and say, like, oh, that's racist. No, we don't mean cultures like Asian culture and Hispanic culture.
values.
No,
We're
yes,
talking
we
about
mean
values.
values. So
We're talking
obviously,
about values.
Aztec culture and Mayan culture, 500-600 years ago, believed in human sacrifice.
Right. Let me clarify this, because I actually was listening to somebody who is. I try to listen to a wide variety of different podcasts, and this person was very, very challenging to listen to, because he was saying, we should have different cultures. We want multiculturalism, and the reality is, you don't really want multiculturalism in the sense of values. What food you eat, what music you listen to, the art that you have. I don't give a damn, and anybody who does give a damn, I really
That's
don't.
kinda racist.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
racist.
Like,
But-
my art is better than yours. That's-
Right. But I don't care. I would love all the arts to come together. Anybody who is expressing that they don't want multiculturalism, and they're trying to defend and say, oh yeah, it's great to have all these things. Of course, nobody is ever saying they don't want to have different arts, different foods, different music.
Yeah.
Maybe some people on the fringe. What we don't want is different values.
Yeah.
We want family values, responsible values,
Working values.
the values of life, liberty, and property being sacred and protected.
Yeah.
These are values that we want to have. Cultures that don't
Sure.
uphold those values, you can't live together.
That's what we
outside
call
of that.
inferior. Yes,
Yeah,
because
that's what we're calling inferior and superior. Somebody who likes pasta and someone who likes tacos, I like them both. I think they're both great. I love being in a country that has all that.
Yeah.
Anybody who is saying that there's
But a
sides on the conservative side that
Yeah.
are, when they're saying we want to hold the same cultures and the same values, we're talking about values
yeah.
of life, liberty,
Yeah.
property, and family.
Like cultures that-
responsibility.
cultures that believe that women are weaker, or that women can't do the same thing men can. Those are values, and
Right.
those are inferior cultures. They
Right.
keep out half the population, essentially.
Right.
So that's
right.
what we mean.
And you're held back by that.
And I think we're going to get into that. So, okay, we're at 47 minutes. So I think we're
Yeah.
ready to sign off, right?
Yeah,
And-
we're just getting ready to sign off. This has been a good show. Again, please give us a call, text, reach out to us, DM us. We want to hear about more topics. If you want to be on the show, we'd love to have you. So I am Doug Petrozelli, and this is the Doug and Fur Show.
And I'm Fernando. All right, bye.